the land that became the world's most secretive state. Imagine a country where millions of people bow before giant bronze statues, where entire cities seem frozen in time, and where one family has ruled for more than 7 decades. Too much of the world, North Korea feels like a mystery wrapped in propaganda, military parades, and nuclear headlines. But this story didn't begin with missiles or dictators. It began with a nation that lost its freedom. At the dawn of the 20th century, Korea was an independent kingdom caught between ambitious empires. Russia, China, and Japan all wanted influence over the peninsula, but Japan emerged victorious. Following its victory in the Russo-Japanese War, Tokyo tightened its grip on Korea before formally annexing it in 1910. For many Japanese officials, Korea was presented as a model colony that would benefit from modernization. Railroads stretched across the countryside, new factories appeared, and ports expanded. Yet beneath this image of progress was a harsher reality. Korean language and culture were increasingly suppressed, land was confiscated, and much of the country's wealth flowed to Japan. Resistance never truly disappeared. Some Koreans organized peaceful demonstrations demanding independence. Others believed only armed struggle could force Japan out. Secret societies formed in the mountains, across the Chinese border, and even deep inside occupied cities. One of the greatest symbols of resistance became the March 1st movement of 1919. Inspired by growing ideas of national self-determination after the First World War, hundreds of thousands of Koreans gathered in towns and villages, carrying homemade independence declarations. The demonstrations spread with astonishing speed. The response was brutal. Japanese troops and police crushed the movement, arresting thousands and killing many protesters. Entire communities were placed under surveillance, while activists fled abroad to avoid imprisonment. Yet the uprising achieved something unexpected. Instead of destroying Korean nationalism, it strengthened it. Exiles established organizations in China and elsewhere, determined to continue the fight. Some looked toward democracy, others toward nationalism, and an increasing number were attracted by a revolutionary ideology spreading across Asia: communism. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, communist ideas inspired many young activists who believed colonialism and capitalism were responsible for Korea's suffering. They dreamed of creating an entirely new society built on equality and independence. Among those influenced by these ideas was a young man named Kim Il-sung. His early life remains surrounded by uncertainty. Official North Korean biographies describe extraordinary achievements from childhood, while outside historians paint a far more ordinary picture. Separating myth from reality has become one of the greatest challenges when studying North Korean history. One popular legend promoted inside North Korea claims that Kim was born beneath a sacred mountain, where a brilliant new star appeared in the night sky and a double rainbow crossed the heavens. Historians reject this story. Most evidence suggests he was born in 1912 and spent much of his youth in neighboring Manchuria. After his family left Korea during Japanese rule, whether by necessity or conviction, the young Kim became involved with anti-Japanese guerrilla groups operating across the forests and mountains of northeastern China. Life there was unimaginably difficult. Food was scarce. Winters were freezing. Japanese patrols constantly hunted resistance fighters, forcing them to move from camp to camp while surviving on whatever they could find. Despite these hardships, Kim developed a reputation as a capable organizer. He joined communist guerrilla units fighting alongside Chinese revolutionaries and participated in raids against Japanese military positions. One attack, carried out near the Korean border during the late 1930s, became especially important for his later image. Although militarily small, North Korean propaganda would later transform the operation into proof that Kim alone had challenged the Japanese Empire. In reality, countless Korean and Chinese guerrillas fought similar battles across the region. Victory was rarely decisive, but each successful raid became another symbol that Japanese rule could be resisted. As the conflict intensified, Japan committed more troops to eliminating guerrilla forces. Entire villages suspected of helping resistance fighters were destroyed. Thousands of civilians disappeared into prisons. Many guerrilla leaders were killed. Kim's surviving forces eventually retreated deeper into Soviet territory, where many Korean fighters received training and equipment from the Red Army. This unexpected alliance would shape the future of Korea, because while the guerrillas fought in the forests, an even larger war was beginning to consume the world. World War I was about to rewrite the political map of Asia. Japan still controlled Korea, but its empire was already beginning to crack. and when it finally collapsed in 1945. Few could imagine that the liberation Koreans had dreamed about for decades would not bring unity. Instead, it would divide the peninsula forever. A nation divided by the Cold War when Japan surrendered in August 1945. Celebrations erupted across Korea. After 35 years of colonial rule, the Korean people finally believed their long struggle for independence had ended. Families hung homemade flags from windows, political groups emerged almost overnight, and many imagined that a free, united Korea was finally within reach. But the future of the peninsula would not be decided by Koreans alone. As World War I drew to a close, the victorious Allies faced a practical problem. Japanese forces stationed in Korea needed to surrender, but there was no agreed plan for who would accept that surrender. In Washington, two American officers hastily drew a line across a map at the 38th parallel. Soviet forces would accept the Japanese surrender in the north, while American troops would take control of the south. What was intended as a temporary military arrangement would soon become one of the most enduring borders in modern history. In the northern half of the peninsula, Soviet soldiers entered cities to cheering crowds. Many Koreans welcomed them as liberators from Japanese occupation. Moscow quickly began helping local communist leaders organize a new administration, believing that Korea could become another friendly socialist state in East Asia. Meanwhile, in the south, American forces arrived with very different priorities. Their main concern was preventing communist influence from spreading throughout the peninsula. The United States supported conservative political leaders who favored close cooperation with the West and the development of a democratic government. Within months, two completely different political systems were beginning to take shape. In the north, factories, banks, and major industries were nationalized. Large estates owned by wealthy landlords were broken apart, and land was redistributed to poor farmers. These reforms earned widespread support among many rural families who had struggled for generations under unequal land ownership. But political freedom was another matter. Opposition parties were gradually silenced, newspapers were brought under state control, and critics disappeared from public life. The new government insisted that unity was essential for rebuilding the nation, leaving little room for disagreement. During this period, Kim Il-sung emerged as the Soviet Union's preferred leader. Although several Korean communists had greater political experience, Kim possessed qualities Moscow valued. He had fought against Japanese forces, spoke Russian after his time in the Soviet Union, and appeared young enough to build a long-lasting government. North Korean propaganda would later claim that the Korean people unanimously chose Kim to lead the nation. Historical records tell a more complex story. His rise was heavily supported by Soviet military authorities, who introduced him to the public during carefully organized rallies. Newspapers praised him as a heroic guerrilla commander whose leadership had helped defeat Japan. Many ordinary citizens had never even heard his name before these events. As Kim strengthened his position, another important process began: the creation of a personality cult. Portraits of the new leader appeared in schools, government offices, and factories. Newspapers published stories celebrating his wisdom and military achievements. School children learned songs praising his leadership, while public ceremonies increasingly revolved around his image. This was only the beginning. Over the following decades, the personality cult surrounding Kim Il-sung would become one of the most elaborate systems of political symbolism ever created. One of the most famous myths claimed that Kim personally led hundreds of victorious battles against the Japanese occupation. Modern historians agree that while he did participate in guerrilla warfare, many victories described in official North Korean history were greatly exaggerated or entirely fictional, blending real events with carefully crafted propaganda. At the same time, tensions between North and South continued to grow. Both governments claimed to represent the entire Korean nation. Neither accepted the legitimacy of the other. Families who had once traveled freely across the peninsula suddenly found themselves separated by checkpoints. Some believed the division would last only weeks. Others feared something much worse. By 1948, the temporary occupation had effectively become permanent. Two separate governments officially declared themselves the legitimate rulers of Korea. In the north, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was established under Kim Il-sung. In the south, the Republic of Korea was founded under Syngman Rhee. Each government promised eventual reunification, but only under its own political system. The Cold War had arrived in Korea. The Soviet Union backed the North, The United States backed the South. The peninsula had become another front in the growing global rivalry between communism and capitalism, yet neither side intended to remain divided forever. Military planning accelerated on both sides of the border. Weapons flowed into the peninsula from foreign allies. Soldiers trained for what many believed would be a short campaign to reunify the country. Few imagined that the coming conflict would destroy entire cities, separate millions of families forever, and reshape global politics. The Korean Peninsula stood on the edge of war, and before long, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century would begin. The war that changed Korea forever at dawn on June 25, 1950. The silence along the 38th parallel was shattered by artillery fire. Thousands of North Korean soldiers crossed the border, supported by Soviet-built tanks and heavy weapons. Bridges shook under the weight of armored columns as aircraft roared overhead. Within hours, one of the first major conflicts of the Cold War had begun. Kim Il-sung believed the campaign would end quickly. His government expected that many people in the South would rise against their own leaders and welcome the Northern Army. Military planners predicted Seoul could fall within days, followed by the rapid reunification of the peninsula under communist rule. At first, events appeared to support that prediction. The South Korean military was caught off guard. Many of its units lacked tanks, heavy artillery, and modern equipment. North Korean forces advanced with remarkable speed, capturing towns one after another. Only 3 days after the invasion began, Seoul fell. Columns of refugees flooded the roads, carrying whatever they could fit onto bicycles, carts, or their backs. Parents searched desperately for missing children. Entire villages emptied as civilians fled the fighting. For countless families, this would be the last time they ever saw one another. Some were separated by advancing armies. Others became trapped behind newly established front lines. Millions would spend the rest of their lives divided by a border they never expected to exist. The invasion immediately alarmed the international community. The United Nations condemned the attack and called on member states to defend South Korea because the Soviet Union was temporarily boycotting the Security Council. It was unable to veto the resolution. Within weeks, soldiers from more than a dozen countries were arriving on the peninsula. The largest contingent came from the United States, led by General Douglas MacArthur. Meanwhile, North Korean propaganda described the conflict very differently. According to official accounts, the South had started the war by attacking first, forcing the North to defend itself. This version remains the official narrative taught inside North Korea today. Most international historians reject that claim. Military documents from multiple countries overwhelmingly show that North Korean forces launched a carefully planned offensive across the border on June 25. By August 1950, South Korean and United Nations forces had been pushed into a small defensive area around the port city of Bisan. The situation looked desperate. Had Bisan fallen, the war might have ended within weeks. Instead, one of the boldest military operations of the 20th century completely changed the course of the conflict. In September, General MacArthur launched a surprise amphibious landing at Incheon, far behind North Korean lines. The operation was considered extremely risky. Strong tides, narrow channels, and high seawalls made the harbor one of the most difficult landing sites in the world. Yet the gamble succeeded. UN forces recaptured Seoul, cutting off North Korean supply lines and forcing their armies into a rapid retreat. Within weeks, the momentum of the war had completely reversed. Now it was North Korean soldiers fleeing northward. UN forces crossed the 38th parallel and advanced toward the Chinese border. Many believed the war was almost over, but another powerful nation had been watching events unfold. China viewed the rapid advance of American-led forces as a direct threat to its own security. In late October 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers secretly crossed the Yalu River under the cover of darkness. Many marched only at night to avoid detection by enemy aircraft. Their sudden appearance stunned UN commanders. Wave after wave of Chinese troops launched massive attacks across frozen mountains and narrow valleys. Outnumbered and surprised, UN forces were forced into one of the longest retreats in American military history. The war had entered an entirely new phase. One remarkable story from this period became known as the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. Fighting in temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius, soldiers struggled not only against enemy fire but also against the brutal winter itself. Weapons froze. Vehicles refused to start. Medical supplies became unusable. Many survivors later recalled that the cold was just as deadly as combat. As the front shifted back and forth, entire Korean cities were reduced to rubble. Bombing campaigns destroyed factories, railroads, bridges, and neighborhoods. Historians estimate that millions of civilians died during the three-year conflict, making it one of the deadliest wars relative to population in modern history. North Korean mythology later claimed that Kim Il-sung personally directed nearly every major military success during the war. In reality, decisions were heavily influenced by Soviet advisors, while Chinese intervention ultimately prevented the collapse of North Korea itself. Without Chinese military support, many historians believe the northern government might not have survived. By 1951, both sides had become trapped in a bloody stalemate. The front lines stabilized close to the same 38th parallel where the war had begun. For 2 more years, soldiers fought over hills, trenches, and fortified positions that sometimes changed hands several times in a single week. Peace negotiations dragged on while the fighting continued. Neither side was willing to surrender. Neither side could achieve complete victory. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. But there was one shocking detail. No formal peace treaty ever followed. Technically, North Korea and South Korea remain at war even today. The ceasefire created the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, a narrow strip of land stretching across the peninsula. Ironically, after decades without human settlement, this heavily fortified border has become one of the world's most unexpected wildlife sanctuaries, where endangered cranes, black bears, and rare species now live undisturbed. The guns had finally fallen silent, but for North Korea, the war was only the beginning. From the ashes of destruction, Kim Il-sung would build one of the most isolated and tightly controlled states the modern world has ever seen.